Welcome everyone to another episode of the Statesman Podcast. So today we are going to discuss about how migration has changed the nature of protests in Zimbabwe in light of the events that happened when Geza called for protests. So blessed Geza called for protests, citizens did not comply. So while Zimbabweans abroad are sending billions back to Zimbabwe, the spirit of resistance seems to be dying in the same country. The fight for change needs bodies, not just dollars, while they are important. But where are Zimbabwe's protesters? Zimbabwe's empty streets during protests are not by accident. Migration has changed everything. Today's episode is all about why protests are dying out in Zimbabwe. Once a vibrant country and with fairly effective protests years back, and today it's quiet. Albert Hirschman's exit, voice, and loyalty framework, it states that when people are dissatisfied with a situation, they have options. The first option is exit. In the case of Zimbabwe, emigrate, go to another country. Second option, voice. They can stay at home, protest, complain, organize, and demand for change. Third option, loyalty. They might stay and remain loyal, perhaps hoping things will change, improve, or they will be feeling unable to exercise either voice or exit. Now, mass migration, it represents a mass exercise of the exit option. This has profound consequences for the voice. That is the ability and propensity to protest domestically. So, how does migration affect or dampen domestic protest? Number one, brain drain and activist drain. So, migrants are among the most dynamic, educated, skilled, and potentially politically aware segments of the population of Zimbabwe, or of any population of any country for that matter. They possess resources in form of financial, intellectual, and social capital, and they often have a lower tolerance for the status quo. The resource mobilization theory, it informs us that for social movements to succeed, they need resources, and these resources, they come in form of leaders, they come in form of organizers, participants, and often funding. So what migration does, it drains the pool of potential protest leaders, organizers, and motivated participants within the borders of Zimbabwe. Those with energy and capacity to challenge the system, they often choose to build a life abroad in other countries elsewhere rather than face the risk that comes with activism. Now, if you look at people like Job Scala, Jacob Ngarivume, they have been very vibrant protesters, but faced with arrests and detention without trial, you get to drain the energy of the very few people that were actually involved in protests in Zimbabwe. Today, you have got a Blessed Mhlanga, a journalist who has been in detention for over 60 days, just for exercising the voice option, indirectly though, and has been there for 60 days, and chances are high that if that person leaves prison, that person, definitely the voice have been will be shut. So you've got people like Strife Masiwa, Atham Tambara, your Dr. Nkosana Moyo. This typically represents the older generation of very talented Zimbabweans. But your Strife Masiwa now is a resident of the United Kingdom. Dr. Nkosana Moyo, he left Zimbabwe. Atham Tambara is somewhere in South Africa. And from the younger generation, the likes of Ivan Mawarire, who became a symbol of hope for the young Zimbabweans. He was handed down for daring to speak the truth. Tawanda Mchehiwa, a very promising young journalist who was silenced for daring to speak the truth, and he exited the country. You have got people like I mentioned, Blessed Mhlanga and stuff like that. So, and people like that. So, circumstances like this, they end up leaving Zimbabwe with people who are politically apathetic, people who don't exercise the voice option. Because the most likely people to do that are the people that exit the country. Millions other Zimbabweans unknown have left the country in search of better economic opportunities. The impact now of this is this leaves behind a population potentially depleted of individuals most likely to initiate, lead, sustain protest movements. The capacity for collective action, it diminishes. That's the end result. Secondly, the Sephet valve effect. Immigration acts as a Sephet valve, releasing social, economic, and political pressure that might otherwise fuel mass protest. When people can leave to escape unemployment, political repression, or hardship, the agents for large-scale domestic confrontation can decrease. Now, this reduces the internal pressure on the ruling regime. The government is left facing a less potent domestic challenge. They might calculate that managing the remaining population, even though dissatisfied, is easier than managing a larger, more agitated population with fewer escape routes. So the impact the Sephet valve effect has is the threshold for triggering mass protests might become higher. Why? Because a key pressure release mechanism is readily available, though often difficult and costly. Now, if things are tough, why not just get a passport and leave for South Africa, go elsewhere, apply for a job in the United Kingdom, go to the United States if there's an opportunity. So that is a pressure release mechanism that is readily available for the highly educated population of Zimbabwe. So the third is shifting the locus of opposition. Third impact of migration. It shifts the locus of opposition. Now, while domestic protest capacity might weaken, migration creates a large and even vocal diaspora. Opposition and critics shift to some extent from the streets of Harare, Bulawayo, or any other city in Zimbabwe to online forums. International advocacy groups and lobbying efforts in host countries. This explains why a diaspora vote will never be permitted as long as ZANU-PF is in power, because the majority, a huge majority of the people in the diaspora, they do not associate with the ZANU-PF, because partly it's one of the reasons why they are not back home in Zimbabwe. So political science explains this as transnational activism. The diaspora can attempt to influence the political opportunity structure by appealing to foreign governments, international organizations, or even leveraging international media. Now, the impact is that while important, diaspora activism lacks the immediate disruptive power of domestic mass protest. It can exert diplomatic or reputational damage, but its direct impact is often limited and indirect. The regime can also diaspora voice as being disconnected from the reality that is on the ground. Additionally, Zimbabweans are generally a risk-averse demos. After the most likely people to protest exit the border of Zimbabwe, those who are left are not up to the task. This can be explained by two prior examples to shed light into how Zimbabweans are risk-averse. They don't take risks. In 2006, the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Union organized a countrywide urban protest against state repression and in the midst of deepening economic crisis. Under normal circumstances, there should have been an overwhelming response. I remember back then I was doing my ordinary level, but instead, the protest dismally flopped when only a few people dared to enter the streets in response to the call for the demonstrations. Now, the paradox is that as the multifaceted crisis in Zimbabwe worsens, the people tend to directly become more and more withdrawn and demobilized. The public aversion to risk is part of Zimbabwe's political culture that predated colonialism and was reinforced by settler colonial repression, militaristic liberation war, ideology, and post-liberation authoritarian politics. This is according to Professor Eldred Masunungure from the University of Zimbabwe. In 2011, a Facebook group called the Zimbabwe Million Citizen March. This is the second example which shows how Zimbabweans have been averse to demonstrations previously. It didn't start with the Geza incident. So a Facebook group called the Zimbabwe Million Citizen March and other online groups, they organized the Zimbabwe Million Main March on 1 March 2011. Objective was to demand the end of Mugabe's 31 years of rule, end political violence and repressive policies. These protests nevertheless did not materialize at large scale. It, however, inspired solidarity. Protests in the diaspora, like in Cape Town, a human rights group called PASOP, they had a very vibrant protest, which further brings to light what we said about the Zimbabweans who exit the country, they go into another country. These are people that are highly likely to do protests. So they had a very successful protest in terms of bringing in the numbers and sending the message to the embassy. But the failure to turn out in Zimbabwe was also criticized or understood better in light of the events that were happening in the Middle East, where the Arab Spring was in full swing. So potentially the organizers thought they could tap into the same energy and we could have a lot of people coming out to protest, but people did not come out. It was a flop. One would have expected Zimbabweans to be inspired by the Arab Spring, but that didn't happen. So let's look at the profile of the migrants for us to certainly bring out to clearly bring out the point that of how migration is affected protests in Zimbabwe. So a survey by one Daniel Makina, it shows that 58% of a sample of 4,654 Zimbabwean migrants in select suburbs in Johannesburg migrated for political reasons, 58%. And political reasons include political persecution, intimidation, and torture, while 82% of respondents cited economic reasons, such as economic crisis. 51% cited economic crisis, and unemployment, 31%. Now, Makina's findings and other survey data shows that over 80% of Zimbabweans migrating to SCA and the UK are between the age of 21 and 40. Now, further, up to 40% of the immigrants in Johannesburg are from Bulawayo, and a further 11% are from Harare, meaning over half of the Zimbabwean migrants in Johannesburg, they come from Zimbabwe's two main urban centers, and which are normally the centers for demonstrations. So migrants from other cities could significantly increase the proportion of urban migrants, as a matter of fact. So additionally, a Southern African migration project, SEMBO, of 2005 showed that 84% of migrants from Southern Africa into South Africa are males. So if we can extrapolate that to Zimbabwe and say that 84% of males from Zimbabwe in South Africa or any other country, they are males, and these are the people that would normally participate in a demonstration more than women. So nearly half of Zimbabwean migrants are well educated. On top of that, 22% have completed a postgraduate degree. This is a master's degree and going further. And 28% have a pre-university credential. These are people with advanced level. They can apply to go to university and successfully be enrolled. So taken together, the profile of an average Zimbabwean migrant is a relatively youthful, well-educated urban male who migrated for political or economic reasons. Now, this is also the profile of a middle-class Zimbabwean, as well as that of a risk-taking political participant who is willing and able to participate or organize in protests. With up to a quarter of the country's population out of the country, a majority of them Zimbabwe's best and brightest, the implications for political activism and protest are potentially enormous. Now, the country has been stripped of critical mass of risk takers who could take part in collective action with the potential to undermine any authoritarian regime in the country. This risk-taking, politically active constituency was the backbone of the movement for democratic change. Without this crucial group, Zimbabwe is simply a nation of apathetic and atomistic risk avoidance. So, further to that, I would add that desperation dampens the voice. So, having been robbed of this critical group, the population which has remained is dominated by risk-averse, politically withdrawn masses. At best, their most active form of resistance is through the ballot box by casting a protest vote. But even then, voters have to contend with the regime's diverse means of manipulating the ballot box. I think this is well studied. We have heard numerous reports of how the elections are rigged and stuff like that. So you have to contend with that. The ferocity of the economic crisis reduced most of what remained of the middle class to a lumpen proletariat that could hardly make ends meet. Now, a large percentage of this group were professionals, and in 2008, they were earning an equivalent of less than $10 a month. GDP growth rate was, at one point in 2008, it reached a negative of minus 14.1%. and it has been in the negative growth for 10 years leading up to 2008. Decades of political and economic crisis in Zimbabwe, they decimated the middle class, which was then compelled to preoccupy itself with the politics of the belly. Even now, the politicians who join from the opposition who are joining politics, they are not necessarily doing it to bring change to the people, as has been shown by recent developments and even the factionalism that has been developing in opposition politics in Zimbabwe. You can tell that it is politics of the belly which is at play now. So this leaves them, a lot of the people in Zimbabwe, with a little stomach to confront the repressive state. Now, the Zimbabwe middle class, as it stands right now, those who are in Zimbabwe is too weak and demoralized to take the voice option. So these are my thoughts when it comes to why migration is led to the dissipation of protest in Zimbabwe, the exercise of the voice in Zimbabwe. It is by no means conclusive and it is by no means exhaustive, but I would like you to engage with me in comments section or on social media. You can simply tag me and then we can discuss. I want to hear your thoughts. I know there are many factors which have led to the dissipation of protests in Zimbabwe. I know there are many, but for me, migration stands out as one of the key factors, one of the key reasons why we do not have massive and effective protests in Zimbabwe, apart from the fact that the Zimbabweans themselves generally are people who are risk averse. They don't generally turn up. They are quite peaceful people, So let me know what are your thoughts and on what I have presented and what other factors do you think have led to Zimbabwe being a country where if people are called out to protest, they don't go for protest, they stay put, asked to stay away, which is a form of protest, a very risk-free, except if your employer is threatening to fire you if you don't turn up for work. Maybe that is the only risk, but it's generally a risk-free type of protest. Stay home, you're not risking anything apart from your job if your employer is pro-government, I would say. And in Zimbabwe, the government is the largest employer, so the very few jobs that are in Zimbabwe being offered by the government, if the government then threatens to take that job if you participate, that may be the only risky part. In terms of harm, there is not much harm that comes with staying away, but it sends also a powerful message. So let me know what you think and let us continue engaging. Thank you so much. See you on the next episode, where we have another very powerful episode where we are talking about electoral capture in Zimbabwe, why elections don't work in Zimbabwe. And I think we are going to start with the connection between the military and the ZANU-PF, and also giving 2008 as a case start. So see you next time. Thank you for watching.